Elena Rodriguez was the most invisible person at Fort Bragg. She worked in the hangar, didn't talk to anyone, never made friends, until that Black Hawk helicopter was about to go down and the pilot screamed over the radio, "Get that mechanic girl from the hangar." That's when everyone realized this woman wasn't just a mechanic. Welcome to The Story Begins. Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure these voices are heard. Elena Rodriguez's life at Fort Bragg could be defined by monotony. Every morning at 6:30, her alarm would go off, and by 7, she'd walk through the doors of the maintenance hangar. Blue coveralls, black boots, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't talk, didn't smile, just did her job. Elena worked in Hangar 7. She was responsible for maintenance and repair of UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. For 3 years, she'd maintained the same routine. Read the reports, identify malfunctions, fix them, write up the paperwork. No complaints, no delays, no problems. The other technicians called her the quiet girl. The pilots usually couldn't even remember her name. They'd call her the Mexican girl from the hangar, even though Elena was American-born and couldn't even speak Spanish. But nobody cared to know these details. She was just there, doing her job, staying invisible. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres was in charge of the hangar. Since hiring Elena, he'd never encountered a single problem. "She's our best technician," he'd tell his superiors. "Never says a word, but does perfect work." Elena's file contained only basic information. Tech school graduate, 3 years experience, previous job at a civilian aircraft repair shop in Wisconsin. Nobody knew that Elena stayed in the hangar alone, at night, doing extra work. Nobody noticed that she could catch 0.1 degree differences by listening to helicopter engine sounds. And absolutely nobody realized that Elena knew every helicopter personally, had memorized every engine's characteristics, and knew exactly what stress level each component operated under. That Monday morning wasn't different from any other. Elena arrived at 7, got her coffee, checked the work list. There was routine maintenance on the Black Hawk with tail number 87-24037. Oil change, filter check, transmission inspection. Elena could do these jobs with her eyes closed. When she approached the helicopter, she paused before opening the engine cover. Something was off. The engine was cold, but there was something different about the oil smell. Very subtle. Only a trained nose could detect it. Elena opened the engine cover and saw it. Metal particles in the transmission fluid. Tiny, almost invisible, but there. This was dangerous. Transmission failure in the air meant death. Elena immediately wrote up a report. Transmission replacement required. Flight restriction recommended. Staff Sergeant Torres read the report and frowned. "Elena, this helicopter has an important mission tomorrow. Are you absolutely sure?" Elena nodded. "Positive, Sergeant. There's metal debris in the transmission. Could break apart in the air." Torres knew Elena was never wrong. Every report she'd filed in 3 years had been accurate. "All right, mission's canceled. We'll find another helicopter." But the story didn't end there, because the malfunction Elena discovered during her routine inspection would save the lives of 12 soldiers, and nobody was aware of it. A week later, the same type of transmission failure showed up in another Black Hawk. This time, Elena didn't have a chance to detect it because that helicopter came from another base. It was on an emergency medical evacuation mission. 12 wounded soldiers were being rushed to the hospital. As the helicopter approached Fort Bragg, the pilot sent out an alarm over the radio. "Mayday, mayday, transmission failure, emergency landing required." Elena was in the hangar working on routine tasks when she heard this call. She ran outside and saw the Black Hawk in trouble in the sky. The helicopter was swaying uncontrollably, and the engine sound was abnormal. The pilot continued over the radio. "Transmission completely failed. We're going down. Need immediate mechanical support on ground." The response from the tower was brief. "Copy that. Emergency crews dispatched." But Elena heard something else in the pilot's voice. Panic. This wasn't just a normal emergency landing. This was a crash landing, with 12 wounded soldiers aboard. The helicopter made a hard landing on the tarmac. The engine was still running, but the sound coming from the transmission made Elena's blood run cold. Metal grinding against metal. The transmission was completely breaking apart. This helicopter would never fly again, and the wounded soldiers inside couldn't be transported to the hospital by another helicopter because backup aircraft were at least 45 minutes away. For the most critically wounded soldiers, 45 minutes was too long. Elena assessed the situation and then ran toward the helicopter. The pilot, Captain Marcus Webb, was an experienced aviator, but right now he was completely helpless. "Transmission's completely gone," he told Elena. "This bird is dead." Elena looked under the helicopter and listened. The engine was still running, the rotor was still turning, but the sounds from the transmission were harbingers of disaster. Under normal circumstances, this helicopter would be immediately grounded. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Captain," Elena said calmly, "this helicopter can fly one more time, but only once, and only for 10 minutes. Webb looked at Elena. This small, quiet technician woman was telling him impossible things. "That's impossible. Transmission is gone. Transmission's damaged, but not completely gone. The main gear is still intact, but the auxiliary gears are breaking apart. If I bypass the auxiliary load, the main gear will work for 10 more minutes." Elena was explaining in terms Webb could understand. "But this is very dangerous. If the main gear breaks apart too—" "It won't," Elena said with certainty, "but only one flight, to the hospital. Then this bird is permanently grounded." Webb evaluated the situation. Waiting 45 minutes meant death for the 3 most critically wounded soldiers. Elena's proposal was dangerous, but it was their only chance. "How long for the fix?" he asked. 3 minutes, Elena said. Webb was surprised. How could a transmission problem be solved in 3 minutes? But Elena was already running to her toolbox. Elena got under the helicopter and started working. This wasn't a normal repair. This was a bypass operation. She would disable the auxiliary transmission gears and load everything onto the main gear. Theoretically possible, practically it was like suicide, because the main gear couldn't handle this load for long. But Elena had done this before, under different circumstances, with different helicopters, for different reasons, and nobody knew this. Elena's hands worked rapidly inside the machine. She disconnected the auxiliary gear's hydraulic line, redirected the load distribution valve to the main gear, set the pressure regulator to maximum. This modification would reduce the helicopter's performance by 40%, but it would fly. 3 minutes later, Elena emerged from under the helicopter. "Done," she told Webb. "But remember, only one flight, maximum 10 minutes flight time, and avoid heavy loads, only critical patients." Webb looked at Elena. This woman had made the impossible possible in 3 minutes. "How do you know this will work?" Elena hesitated for a moment. Then she said, "Because I know this machine." Webb wanted to ask more questions, but there was no time. The 3 most critically wounded soldiers were loaded into the helicopter. Elena stepped back and watched the helicopter take off. The engine sound was still abnormal, but it was working. The rotor was stable. The transmission load indicator was in the red zone, but it was holding. The helicopter lifted off and headed toward the hospital. Elena followed the flight with her handheld radio. "Flight time 7 minutes to hospital," Webb said over the radio. "Transmission holding but temperature rising." Elena knew the helicopter would make it to the hospital, but after landing, it would never fly again. The main gear would also suffer complete failure. But what mattered was getting the wounded soldiers to the hospital. 9 minutes later, word came from Webb. "Successful landing at hospital. All patients delivered. But you were right, this bird is completely dead now. Transmission seized completely." Elena smiled, for the first time in 3 years, because 3 soldiers were alive. But the story didn't end there. because Webb's radio conversation had been heard throughout the entire base. The words, "Get that mechanic girl from the hangar," were in everyone's ears. And now everyone was wondering, who is this woman? When Staff Sergeant Torres found Elena, she was back to her normal work, as if nothing had happened. "Elena," Torres said, "Webb told me. You fixed the transmission in 3 minutes." "Not fix," Elena said. "Temporary bypass. Helicopter's grounded now." "But how did you know you could do this?" Elena stopped. For 3 years, nobody had asked her these kinds of questions. "Experience," she said simply. But Torres wasn't satisfied with this answer. "Elena, your file says civilian aircraft experience. Military helicopter transmission bypass isn't something a civilian technician would know." Elena knew she couldn't hide the truth anymore. "Sergeant, Elena Rodriguez," a new voice came. Colonel James Harrison, one of the base's top-ranking officers, was approaching Elena. "Can I speak with you?" Elena looked at the colonel. This conversation was inevitable now. Sitting in Colonel Harrison's office, Elena was preparing to tell her real story for the first time in 3 years. The colonel was looking at her file.
Elena Rodriguez, 29 years old, civilian aircraft technician background.
Then he looked at Elena. "But this file isn't complete, is it?" Elena nodded. "No, sir, it's not complete." "Then let's hear the real story." Elena took a deep breath. "Sir, I was a test pilot in the Army for 6 years. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Night Stalkers." The colonel's eyebrows rose. The Night Stalkers were the Army's most elite helicopter unit. "Test pilot?" "Yes, sir. YMH-60M Ghost Hawk test program, classified stealth helicopter development." The colonel now understood. "And why did you come here as a civilian technician?" A painful expression appeared on Elena's face. "Because there was an accident during a test flight. I made a pilot error. My co-pilot died." Silence filled the office. The colonel reviewed the file again. "This accident, is it in classified records?" "Yes, sir. My real identity is classified. Accident report is classified. Everything is classified." "And who assigned you here?" "Orders came from the Pentagon. New identity, civilian cover, low-profile assignment. I was being monitored for PTSD." The colonel studied Elena for a long time. "And now? How's the PTSD?" Elena smiled slightly. "Sir, for 3 years I've been doing helicopter maintenance, but not flying. This was my therapy. Understanding machines, fixing them, but not flying them. But today in the emergency, you made a fast decision. You helped Webb. Because there was no other choice, 3 soldiers were dying." The colonel nodded. "Elena, I just learned about your background. But you've had excellent work performance for 3 years, and today you saved 3 lives." Elena waited to hear what the colonel would say. "Do you still want to be a pilot?" This question surprised Elena. For 3 years, she'd been afraid to ask herself this question. "Sir, I'm not sure. After the accident, accidents happen, Elena. But you're an exceptional pilot and an exceptional technician. This combination is very rare." The colonel stood up. "I'm going to make you an offer. You can return to the test pilot program. But this time, you'll be not just a pilot, but also a technical advisor. You'll both fly and use your technical expertise." Elena was shocked. "Sir, is this possible? My accident report, I reviewed the accident report. You didn't make a pilot error. There was mechanical failure, but the investigation at the time wasn't complete. Now the truth has come out." Elena couldn't believe her eyes. For 3 years she'd blamed herself, but the truth was mechanical failure. "Sir, I need to think about it."
Of course. But Elena, today you saved 3 lives, and you have a natural relationship with helicopters.
This shouldn't be wasted. When Elena left the colonel's office, for the first time in 3 years she was thinking about the future. Returning as a pilot. Was this possible? That evening, Elena was alone in the hangar. She was examining Webb's helicopter. Complete transmission failure, exactly as she had predicted. But the mission was successful. The 3 soldiers were in stable condition at the hospital. Elena sat in the helicopter's pilot seat. For the first time in 3 years, she put her hands on the controls. Muscle memory was returning. She had missed this feeling. "Elena?" The voice came from Torres. "Are you in here?" "Here, Sergeant." Torres entered the hangar and saw Elena in the pilot's seat. "How does it feel?" Elena smiled. "Familiar. Colonel Harrison talked to me. He told me about your real background." Elena turned to Torres. "And what do you think?" "I think my best technician for 3 years has been a pilot, and you did exceptional work today." "Torres, Elena, listen. You've been doing perfect work for 3 years. No complaints, no errors. And today you saved 3 lives. Whatever your background is, you're an asset." Elena got down from the pilot seat. "Thank you, Sergeant. Are you going back to the pilot program?" Elena looked around the hangar. For 3 years, this place had been her sanctuary. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe it's time." A week later, Elena was in a meeting at the Pentagon. A new phase of the Ghost Hawk test program was beginning, and she was being offered a position as both pilot and technical advisor. "Rodriguez," said General Martinez, "you're the original test pilot of the Ghost Hawk. And you're the most experienced technician. Nobody else has this combination." Elena looked around the meeting room. 3 years ago, in one of these rooms, her career had ended, and she'd taken on a new identity. Now she had a chance to return. "General, I accept." 6 months later, Elena Rodriguez was the chief pilot and technical officer of the Ghost Hawk test program. She was both flying and providing technical input in the development process, and that 3-minute miracle repair at Fort Bragg was the beginning of her legend. Staff Sergeant Torres still talks about Elena, saying, "She was my best technician. Then we found out she was actually our best pilot." Captain Webb, when telling other pilots about Elena's emergency bypass, says, "She made the impossible possible in 3 minutes." And Elena, on every flight, thinks about those 3 wounded soldiers, because that day she understood that hiding from your abilities is not healing. Using your abilities to help others, that's healing. Elena Rodriguez was no longer hidden. She was a pilot, a technician, a lifesaver, and finally, herself. So have you ever known someone like this? Someone who hid their true abilities, but revealed them at a critical moment? Share with us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so these kinds of stories continue to be told. Many more hidden talent stories await you on the Story Begins channel. See you in the next video.